I want to wish everybody a very warm hello this Monday afternoon, morning, evening, wherever you are. Just what comes to me real briefly, quickly, is that many of you know I'm supporting an Afghan family here. And I don't know how it happened, but I ended up introducing the work that we do with Catholic Charities. And we're also collaborating with an organization at the University of Mass. And this Saturday, we're going to be offering a pilot project for Afghan women in the area where they've never been brought together to actually share what they're experiencing since they've been here since October and November. And I'm really excited about, again, new approaches to focusing and how we can bring it to existing structures and stuff. So that's what's coming for me this morning. Very excited that Greg is with us today. We don't see each other very often, but when I'm in his presence, I feel this expansiveness inside of me and possibilities. And I think just having conversations over the years with him has given me some solid acceptance of that there's always more and new ways of approaches. And this topic, how to be a diverse community rather than a point of view, really resonates for me. I'm living in a co-housing community in Massachusetts, and it's really applicable right here. You know, it's sort of a living thing that how can we do that without being shamed, you know, or put down, or if you have a different point of view, how can that hold with a whole community that maybe a majority opinion that's very different than yours. So anyways, I'm just really grateful, Greg, for your being with us today. Thank you.
And I want to second that welcome. And just I see Greg's face and it just does something, you know. My world expands, and there's a sort of light. To me, Greg, you have this wonderful combination of this lightness and this gravitas, and I love that combination. And we've been sort of really using and enjoying the talk that Greg gave last year about inner democracy. People all the time. And so we're so happy to have a sort of sequel to that and a different slant on that and continuation of that, carrying forward of that. I just wanted to say we're starting a new YouTube channel that will be about the varieties of focusing oriented therapy. And Greg's last talk is on my channel, but it will be on this new channel, and this talk will be on it also, and you'll be hearing more about this new channel. So Greg, I'm anticipating with great delight whatever you bring to us this morning. And it's such fun for me to also bring you this group as it's developed in the last, you know, since you've been here last. I think this is such an expansive group, and always was, but more and more able to really play with anything that's presented to us.
Terrific. Thank you. First of all, I immediately feel like I'm going to disappoint you after those introductions. That's okay with me. I normally don't like to read things. I like to just be a little bit more spontaneous, but today I actually am going to read what I've prepared. I've tried to make it as concise as possible, but I don't want to skip over anything that kind of needs to be said from my point of view. So what I'll do is I'll read a few things. I'll ask a few questions for you to consider. I'll read a little bit more. Then we can open it for some discussion. And then I'd like to give you a few possible prompts before you go into the small groups, just things that you might want to consider, and it's fine with me if you don't want to consider them. Those prompts and the other questions I'll put in the chat, so you can have those later if you want them. So this carries on from what I presented some time ago on inner democracy, but this time it's called How to Be a Diverse Community Rather Than a Point of View. A community of perspectives rather than just one perspective. So, first thing I want to say is that there's nothing here that denies the need for safe environments to explore the various voices within us. We can't easily probably expose the vulnerable or unwanted aspects of our being when we already feel under attack. So I think that that probably goes for all of us. There's some amount of safety that we need if we're going to go to the most vulnerable parts of ourselves. So what are we doing to help create safe enough spaces in our interactions? Secondly, I want to acknowledge that the world is not a neutral place. It's full of pre-existing biases and prejudices and injustices. And of course, that also has an impact on our so-called inner world. So with those acknowledgements, let's start with just a few questions. There's 6 questions here. The first is, can a focusing practice offer a safe enough space that we have some time to consider views that might be different from what we otherwise feel pressured to believe? And I can put these in the chat, so you don't need to write them down. The second question, what are the connections, if any, between personal process and social change? And the third question, is diversity of ideas an important kind of diversity, both inside of us and between us? The fourth question, how do we deal with othering and power imbalances inside of ourselves? The fifth question, which feels very important to me, does a more fluid identity make us less able to act in the world? Do we need to seem certain in order to act effectively? And then the last question, which also feels important to me, what would it feel like to be a good enough citizen? These questions point towards the ethics of bodily experience. How do we treat the other within us and the others around us? What is our attitude towards diversity inside as well as outside? I want to propose that there could be a continuity from accepting our own personal complexity all the way out to forming communities where belonging is not based upon people having to be the same. Perhaps there's a kind of inner activism that involves radical acceptance of all of us, as well as each part of everyone else. And would that be a useful complement to external activism? For me, it has always been crucial that the process of change remains consistent with the ethical principles that motivate the change. Too often, the method, the means, and the intention, the ends, are inconsistent. We want a better world, but we do not model it in our way of trying to achieve it sometimes. I believe that focusing could help with this. The respectful primacy of a deep listening process makes focusing compatible with efforts to humanize society, because as a practice, focusing already is that care for humanity and diversity. The inner democracy that I've spoken about before is democracy as a kind of consensus where each voice inside of us gets equal weight. We need to disidentify with the loudest, most certain voice in order to hear all of the others. Consensus may develop if we listen closely to each voice. Focusing style democracy should slow down the decision making so that the whole being of each person has the potential to be involved in the process. Decisions, this is my claim, decisions that are arrived at in this way should have a feeling of rightness inside. Therefore, the agreed action is more likely to be carried out and doesn't have to be constantly revisited or half resisted because it only resonates with 51% or only makes logical sense, but doesn't feel right. So 2 more claims by me. Focusing or a practice like it brings democracy to each individual body and each individual body into the workings of democracy. The second claim, to replace one ideology with another is no longer radical enough. We need to replace ideology with process. So I've got 2 more points about this approach to inner diversity or inner democracy. The first, are you more like a diverse community than a unified whole? In our experience, we have probably all noticed that we have various aspects or parts of ourselves. For example, vulnerable parts that are courageous, parts that always resist no matter what is being offered, insecure parts. We may not want all of these parts. We may even feel ashamed of some of them or cast them out into exile. However, if we want a diverse community within us, then each part is included as equal. A person is a democracy when he or she can openly listen to, not necessarily agree with or act upon, but openly listen to all parts of them with equality and compassion. Inner democracy is the opposite of attempts to achieve inner peace through the pressure to conform, subtle oppression, or rejection of parts. It's the opposite of attempts to control, convince, or cajole ourselves, rather than to listen carefully for the wisdom contained within each part, and by extension, the wisdom within each part of each person in the group. A feature of this democracy is that it asks us to be open with ourselves first, and then with other people. To momentarily put down our positions, our politics, our presumptions, our projects, our opinions, so that for a moment we can directly contact all of ourselves and then all of another person, potentially. Can we put the personal contact first? This is quite different from reducing the person to only their point of view. And then the second and last point. Can inner democracy be a model for organizing? Inner democracy presumes process, change, rather than fixed feelings and opinions. We expect minds to change as they're listened to, but not just other people's minds, also our own. We do not impose permanent conclusions or hold someone to a particular point of view. It's a continuous process of felt sensing that, first of all, requires a valuing of diversity so that we relieve the dictatorship of the I of its responsibility to define us. It is the opposite of being hijacked by one part in order that the rest of us has to tag along, silent, subjective, and oppressed. It's the opposite of that. Could we continue this kind of inner democracy out towards others through deep listening, treating each part of another person with the same equality and respect that we want to treat each part of ourselves? Each person, I would claim, probably has contradictory parts if we allow all parts to be heard. Can we value the different points of view within and between, and then pause for a right action step to emerge, not through force, but from process steps, which we know through focusing? Surely, recent politics in the West, at least, shows us how silencing opposing points of view doesn't lead to any process of change. I'm suggesting a kind of living democracy that never stops reopening concepts, ideas, opinions, roles, and structures that become subtly rigid and then enslave the very life they were created to serve. A living democracy must originate from the individual's attitude towards their own self as a diverse community. And it's based upon experiential listening, not adhering to a position and not just voting. And then there's two quotes here by Jean. The first one: a genuinely political self-experience is possible. Our deepest self-responding also has political dimensions. There is a way to move from the merely inner psychology of self to a self-understanding within the larger system. We can learn from how the women's movement moved from what seemed to be only psychological issues to politically understood issues. The inner is never just inner. When you consider it inner, you keep the tension within yourself and cut experience off from the social change it implies. And then the second quote, and that's the last thing I'll say for now. This is from Jean Jamin as well. How can people organize themselves in a different way? The great movements of the 20th century all failed around this issue. Whatever their ideal and aims, the mode of organization was always the same. And that, not the ideals, determined what really happened. Focusing and everything that it opens should lead to a different mode for people to organize. So I have some other questions that I'd like to share just before you break into the small groups, but for now, I think that's probably enough for me.
Wow, that was a lot and so rich. Are we ready to, are you ready for us to respond?
Yes, I'm ready for some responses before the smaller groups.
Maybe we need a couple of breaths to even.
It was dense, I realized that. I was worried I wouldn't.
It was so richly dense that I'm so glad that I'll be able to actually see it and hear it again and capture all of those. Where are those quotes from of Jean's? Those are beautiful quotes.
I can't remember where the first one's from. I think it's maybe from the paper on politics. I can't remember, political critique of awareness or something. And the
Yes.
second one about organizing is from a very small paper that he did just for the focusing community on how can focusing influence the way we organize.
Mm. Okay, let's just take a few breaths together, and whatever is there for you, we want to hear. Even if it's a half-formed thought. Yes, go ahead.
Greg, thank you. I'm so, wow. I'm super excited. There's a part of me that's judging this as a very trivial question, but I just want to know, where have you written this? Where is it published? How can I access it? And feeling incredibly grateful because I'm feeling like it's going to be a wonderful, just such a wonderful offering to include in my in the dissertation that I'm writing. And so I'm just like, I'm like so excited about what you've just shared and how to access it and how to build on it.
Thanks, Rosa. I'm honored you feel that way. I haven't written it anywhere. I feel timid about it. So maybe you'll encourage me to write it more formally someplace.
Well, also we will have the transcript of this session, and so Greg's talk and the transcript will be on the new YouTube channel and on my YouTube channel before that. So it should be up very soon. I also thinking, oh, what a wonderful thing there was a couple of things you said, Greg, that I said, oh, this would be so wonderful to put in my invitation for a community empowerment project.
I'm curious what struck you that way.
I'll have to go back and look.
Yeah, if I may just follow up briefly, it was just hard to put thoughts together because I'm just like, wow. But I just want to say that the incredible synchronicity. I was just speaking with someone last night who gave me back, it wasn't exactly a reflection, but I was saying a lot and she was listening. She had asked to listen. I guess it was a little bit of a TAE-like thing. But then she contributed from her own inspiration. So it was like kind of a meta reflection. It was what I was trying to say, but very roundabout. And what she said was, it sounds like what you are struggling with is that the questions that a lot of political science and political theory is grappling with were laid down in the forms of Enlightenment thinking. And so they don't allow us to think about politics as human beings, right? Because it's a very limited range of thoughts about who human beings are. And so I feel like you've just offered the the answer to this challenge that she was clarifying yesterday. So it's, yeah, I'm just hugely excited. Thank you so much, Greg.
And that feels exciting to me as well when you say it that way. Yeah, it feels good.
Thank you, Greg. This was fantastic. It's so nice to see you again. I'm sure you don't remember me. I was in one of your, at a conference where we had a morning weekly group where you met every morning. It's maybe 7 years ago or something like that. So I was excited that you were speaking, and I totally feel this way. Like, for me, that's the only way that we can materialize democracy out there, if we can be aware and understand how you called it something community, the diverse community we have inside. I like that wording, the diverse community, and to give an experiential listening to each of those parts or places inside. And it was really interesting. Few things I'm thinking of. One thing is, I definitely have that resistant part that always showed up, and it was really nice to hear some parts of us always show up, whatever. And I have that part that always come. So that was appeasing and normalizing to hear that on a personal level. I am curious also, this is a model that I don't understand why focusing is not as out there than IFS, for example, that has, from the little bit of what I know, taken some very juicy idea or concept or ways of working that focusing was already offering before. And I understand it's also taking it from other theories, experiential therapies, etc. But your model or your way of expressing all of this feels very much like a tying both therapy approaches. And yeah, it's a wonderful way to come to democracy or some peace inside or some way of being with all those differences. So that's very exciting to hear. I hope you're going to put it out there, and love to hear and see. And yeah, this is so important, especially right now with all that's going on. We would have that in government. That, I think the decision will be made very differently, even with totalitarianism. So thank you. Thank you so much. So nice to see you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I have to say that as I was listening to everything you were saying, there was a feeling of being really moved because of the power of all of this, the political power, the ethics of all of this. And this is all I can say for now, because as Lynn, there were so many things that you mentioned. I tried to write down everything, but some amount of safety, the inner democracy, the replacing ideology with process, the listening. If we can listen to our parts, then we can listen to other people's parts, and the power of this. It's wow. It's like, and one of the things I believe, what Sophie, you were saying about why isn't focusing that much known, and I think it's because of its power. That's all I need to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I wanted to come in on that idea of power, and number 7 in the chat. Does a fluid identity make us less able to act in the world? Do we need to seem certain in order to act effectively? And I feel like I struggle with that as a communicator, that the idea that I'm not persuasive, like there's some people I know who are persuasive, maybe yourself, Greg, but so part of me wants to answer that question. Yeah, as a focuser, yes, fluid identity is great because we aren't fixed in our ideology. We're able to be more sensitive to the world and be responsive. And that makes us more skillful in our actions. But that certainty, I think there is a quality of certainty that we need to act effectively, being powerful, being persuasive. Maybe that certainty is the certainty we get as focusers, where you're speaking from a part. It doesn't have to be all your parts, but it's embodied speech, maybe.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think that word certainty can mean very different things. There can be the certainty of actually feeling quite grounded in the community of yourself and open to noticing what stands out at different points in a conversation with someone. And that just the grounding in that community gives you a kind of certainty or a kind of trust that you're guided by something worth listening to. But then there's another kind of certainty, which is a certainty I know in myself and I'm not happy with, where I pretend to be very certain about something, and all the time I'm trying to convince somebody else. I'm busy kind of trying to hush the voices inside of me that are kind of going like, yeah, but Greg, what about, yeah, but what, we don't really believe this so certainly, you know, we don't believe it the way you're expressing it. That kind of inner conflict inside of myself is what I really want to point to. That I think in the world today, there's a lot of strong pronouncement. And I think it would be valuable if all of us were able to open up to the aspects of ourselves that actually have a different point of view, maybe even the other person's point of view. And rather than do what I do, try to hush it or ignore it, actually bring it around to the front and listen to it.
So this is a little murky, but there's also something about how that point of view is being articulated. You know, some people could say the same thing in different ways and be received differently. So if somebody comes across, like I said before, like shaming, and then somebody could say the same thing, but in a different way, and they're sort of offering the same point of view, but it's just how it's presented and how it's received. And how even inside of me, how I receive these two points of view, the same point of view differently.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm curious about what is the difference inside of those two people that they express themselves so differently?
Well, I'm just thinking about my own relationship with my partner, where or with other people, where I get into a place where there's a kind of polarization, so that I get attached to that what you said about, you know, that's the strong voice, and ignore the other voices. And then the other person probably does the same thing. And in reality, it's a sort of pseudo certainty rather than a real certainty.
Yeah.
And it's quite hard for me to kind of shift away from that into a more holistic kind of certainty, or where I'm listening to the different parts.
Exactly. Yeah. It can be very difficult to back down. Yeah.
I was thinking about how a political friend of mine would receive what you were saying, Greg. And I imagined, of course, this was a part of me, but I imagined that he would say there has to be room for disagreement and for, you know, if somebody is expressing a point of view that you feel is really destructive, or they're presenting it in a way that's really destructive, there, aside from respectful listening, there has to be room to vehemently disagree. And so I was mulling that over in my mind about how can we have the diversity that the vulnerable parts that may be vehement and aggressive are also vulnerable, and they can be really heard, and they can be, there's a place after the hearing to really disagree. And then I was remembering some of the conversations that I've had with Gene Genlin, where he would be vehemently disagreeing with me, and I would be vehemently disagreeing with him, but he would wholeheartedly disagree. And then after a pause, he would say, but you might say, and then he would take my side of it, which was in part really modeling for me a way of both receiving something and disagreeing with it. And that felt like a kind of something could be satisfied. And yes, we can vehemently disagree and take the other person and say, well, what could be right in what this other person is saying? Or how could that be? Or what would the world look like if it were like that?
Yeah, exactly that spirit. I'm beginning to wonder, of course, I don't know this, and this is part of the experiential thing that I guess we'll move into soon. I'm beginning to wonder if the more vehement the expression, the more likely it is that inside of that person there are contradictory views.
Yes. Yeah. We had a wonderful discussion, and I'm going to have to ask people's permission to put it up on YouTube, about the war and about the political situation. And there was heartfelt expression and people coming from very different places. And I remember a conversation with Susan Diceroth where I was saying, well, it seemed like there was a kind of polarity of people who were saying, I want to be like Thich Nhat Hanh and put my arms around the raging child in Putin, and other people that were saying, we need to stand up to bullies. And Susan said, well, I have both of those feelings and perspectives, and I imagine that many of us in the group have both of them. And when she said that, I thought, oh, of course, that's the inner democracy, is that we have all of that in us.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. I have a belief that wise action comes from listening to everyone that's around the campfire.
Mm.
I'd like to say something, which is that point number 3, the diversity of ideas and within us and among us. Well, when thinking about therapy, what I'm getting from this is a sense of that one, it kind of gives you a broader perspective on parts, and that often we value some of the certain parts more than others. So, the vulnerable part is, but I think the critics, even though the critic might also be a hurt part, it's kind of, some ways different. I've got a perspective that probably one wants to be without the critic, and I know that if one pays attention to the critic, it shifts, but just something about that if you allow all of those to have some kind of equality, instead of thinking the vulnerable child is really the most needy. So that was very helpful.
Great, thank you.
Yes.
I just want to, I'm so sorry. I wish I could remember who had said it, but someone earlier expressed a longing. Maybe it was just in the chat, but I think somebody voiced it as well. So Vera in the chat was expressing a longing for this sense of what you're talking about, Greg, right? The longing for, and to me, that really connects with this last question about what would it feel like to be a good enough citizen? And I'm just struck by how isolated our experience as citizens is when it's reduced to voting for whoever happens to end up in the 51%, right? And how just how fragile, in a sense, those 51% majorities can be, where, you know, we supposedly all think the same, and so now we're in power, and the other side is out of power, and so this woman I was speaking with yesterday mentioned the philosopher who I've not yet read. Gosh, her name is escaping me right now, but she wrote a lot about political theory and also comes from Austria, like Jean. Oh my goodness, she's very famous. And anyway, she was saying that in her philosophy, there's this sense that human beings have this longing to be both for the inner democracy and for the outer democracy, like deeper democracy, stronger democracy that really embodies the kind of listening to all the different perspectives within oneself and perspectives within others. And so I'm just finding that in the interviews I'm doing of the people who get a chance to be in these public policy processes where everyone is deeply heard, this sense of like coming aliveness and this sense of like incredible fulfillment to be able to be in that kind of space with others. And of course, Lynn, you're creating that here, right? In this space. And so we've had these little touches of experience of that, and just the sense that how much more fulfilling that is than this being a citizen by just going and casting your vote for a person who, you know, presents a public face that maybe represents 51% of what's inside of you, and then goes on to, you know, anyway, thank you again.
Exactly. Thank you. So should I read my little prompts?
Yes, but this is one of those moments where I feel that someone who is shyer maybe, or has less English or newer, has something to say. So let's just wait for a moment. It's always wonderful to have that pause and then see. Maybe what you have to say, you don't have it all together, but there's something. And there's a felt sense that that we're trying to cultivate in this group, a felt sense of, oh, I have something there. Something is landing in me. A felt sense of, I could share this. So let's just give a moment and see if there's anyone that even just wants to say hello.
I would like to say something. I would like to say something about the inner democracy with each voice having equal weight, and what a struggle that is for me, because the critic is constantly speaking to various voices and putting them down. And I just keep reading that line over, which I wrote down over and over again, and how much like inner work, like that could be my daily practice of going in and checking out which one is being heard less and which one needs more attention and which one needs more loving compassion, just whatever comes up around it. Because what I realized, like I was in a group yesterday, and like if I don't do that work, then I end up projecting one of these one of these parts that's in struggle. I end up projecting that out and putting that on the other person and not owning it. And then it all gets at a jumble and into confusion. So I just really love that about equal weight to the voices. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And that sounds like a wonderful daily practice.
Does.
Mhm.
I'll just have a brief go. I spent a couple of maybe 3 years almost living in lands where there's an indigenous population, and I'm back in England, and this sort of speaking to, like, there's something really missing here for me. There's something in every sphere that's missing, and that idea that we've only got the Enlightenment vocabulary or structures, or the stuff that led to the environment, language and structures, that's the only thing we can sort of, that's all of our Lego bricks. That's all we can build with. And there's such a relief to even make this pause and go, no, it's process. It sort of does that. Here's indigenous art, you know, it goes, oh, we have like a whole different, and there's not even a different set of Lego bricks. It's a whole different thing. We can play with this thing instead. And so it's good for me that someone's doing this and that we're meeting, just to go, oh, something that's not that process. So thank you.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. I guess maybe now we're ready. We've heard two more.
Okay. I will also put this in the chat. So if there's anything I say that you want to remember, you don't have to write it down. I'll just put it in the chat. Okay. So sometimes when we have strong opinions and maybe hardened political stances, it may be because we have identified ourselves with the loudest voice in us and lost the experience of ourselves as a diverse community. I wonder if we don't, in reality, have at least some diversity within us on almost every issue. But perhaps we've become accustomed to trying to ignore rather than listen to all the voices within, or perhaps we feel afraid to express some of these voices even to ourselves. Even if I express a strong view on some issue, is that the whole perspective I have within me? Or is there sometimes at least some other opinions, even a part that agrees with the other point of view? So can we open up to the whole range of the parts within us, allow true diversity of opinion in our own experience, even if externally we're wedded to expressing only one of them? So there's 3 different sort of prompts that I would encourage you to maybe just take into yourself and see if any of these resonate. And if they do, you might want to spend some time exploring them further. The first one, I would encourage you to start maybe just by clearing a bit of space from any of your individual concerns at the moment. All of the important things that are going on in your personal world. Your concerns, your worries, your commitments, your excitements. Maybe just to notice them Acknowledge that they're there. And then let yourself have a little bit of space from all of them just for the next few minutes. And then, if you would like to, perhaps see if there is a perspective that you hold quite passionately. And maybe ask yourself whether that perspective represents all of you, or is there some diversity within you? One or two parts maybe that timidly expresses at least a nuance on the issue, or even a contrary point of view. Would you like the community of you to include all of you, or only just some parts of you? And then the second thing that you might want to consider, and again, I'll put these in the chat. You might want to just silently ask inside of you, what quality would I like my inner community to have? What kind of atmosphere or environment would I like to establish inside of myself? And then if it feels okay, maybe imagine that kind of community that you want on the inside could also exist in the groups that you belong to. What would that be like? How would it feel if you were in that kind of community inside and outside? What parts of you would shine freshly? What would come alive in you? Thank you.
Okay, I think we're ready for our breakout rooms, and Christine, my inner Christine is reminding me to tell you that if you need to leave, you should leave now before you accept your breakout room, so that you aren't abandoning your comrades here. And so we'll be in groups of 3, and we'll have 20 minutes, perhaps 5 minutes for each person to explore, and then 5 minutes for the group to sort of reflect on the process. And we'll be back at 9:30, and then we'll resume our whole group discussion. Welcome back, everybody. Oh, I see Kate is here, and Bob and Nancy. Here we go. Rachel. Ian. Oh, maybe we'll begin to share what came for you in the rooms? How was your experience? Is it sort of like we go on a hunt for treasures, and then we come back and we bring all our treasures to the campfire, you know, and share them?
For me, one of the things that came out of my small group was an emphasis on what Greg was saying about the quality of how it is we receive the different points of view. How experience it is dependent, at least from my perspective, on the quality of how it's presented. Rachel H. Talked about the sponginess. Is it spongy where it lands on you, or is it hard like cement how it lands on you?
Yes, right. Yeah. I think that one of the magical qualities of focusing is that you could take in the cement and process it for a moment, and then you could give it out in a spongy way when you try to reach right the deeper point that the person is trying to get at, but the cement kept them from getting at it. And that can be so empowering when you don't get so triggered by the cement that you can't do it.
Right.
So I'm really curious about exploring more the receiving quality that I feel is required for inner democracy and outer democracy, and what you were talking about, Lynn, and I have some ideas, of course, experiential ways of, ideas that I've gathered from experiencing this. But I'm wondering, so how, and one of those elements is time. It takes quite some time and patience to hear. And I'm sure some of you have experienced this with complex internal system. It takes a lot of time. There's not just three parts and some are entangled together and you don't always hear them well, and it needs some other pathway to get to it and all of that. So when I'm thinking of when there is a crisis, you know, how do we do this process? Do we need like a crisis kind of process that can accelerate things? And often I found that decision in our world are made often from this place. So there is a crisis over here, or this is happening. So yeah, that's a big question I have. Thank you.
Yeah, good question.
It felt like there was something more in you, Sophie, that maybe you could focus on during the week or something, about a process. You know, there's something being born in you about that.
Thank you, Lynn.
I think I interrupted you, Greg. You were going to say more.
Well, I mean, I think that Sophie is rightly pointing out, and I think Bob was pointing to the same thing, that the quality of the environment really matters, the quality of the welcome. I think in Sophie's more specific question of what about in a crisis when we don't have time to sit around and sort of have coffee with every part of ourselves. I would still think that there's two things that help. And one is that inner atmosphere, to have an atmosphere of gentleness and inclusivity. Even if you don't have time to listen to every part, at least every part knows that you would want to listen to it. I think that makes a difference. The other thing I would say is if you're in a group of say 10 people and you need to make a very quick decision, if you went around and each person laid everything on the table, I think you'll come to a wiser decision than if each person only presents one point of view. And it doesn't take that much more time to just lay it on the table. It does take more time to really deeply listen, of course.
Mm.
And I would think it would take also some guidelines around how do we lay that on the table, right?
Yes,
Because you can lay down a bomb, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good point. It's like the environment, the internal environment isn't the only one that we're attending to. It has to feel safe enough for us to lay everything on the table. Absolutely.
Yeah, along those lines, something came up in our small group about, the kind of safety that is needed to lay on the table the parts inside of ourselves that are maybe we feel most ashamed of or like that. And at the same time, it feels like such a potential power to that, right? Of being able to have more inner freedom. And this is just my own thoughts on it right now, but just maybe not be so afraid of that in others, or if we can welcome that in ourselves, somehow yeah. That, and then the other thing that I was really struck by was this sense of how when really difficult things are happening in the world, maybe like, it's like some of us can hold space for others, but then those of us who are holding space may also need other people to hold space for us. And so that sense of I guess of nested circles of support or something, and so that it's not, well, again, I'm adding a little something here, but it's not necessarily like democracy, like, okay, let's give everyone equal turns. Maybe it's what is in greatest need goes in the center, but then the people who are supporting that in turn also, as we know, help for the helpers also need spaces where they can receive support. Thank you.
Mhm. Yeah.
When we call it an inner democracy, I wonder if we're already making an assumption, an opinion that that's the best form of government. Somebody in our group, I'm not going to take credit, but I don't want to, but she said something that I thought was great, was an inner diplomacy. That maybe that comes before you decide on your form of government.
Huh.
Interesting. The inner diplomacy, I would say, is perhaps pointing again to the kind of atmosphere or approach or welcome. I like that term, inner diplomacy. But inner democracy, I would say, the term democracy, if we mean it to mean something different than it normally means in the external world, I would say that that is the atmosphere that we want to create, where everything gets heard. Yeah, democracy is maybe a slightly misleading term for that now, but it's what I want that term to mean.
And we get to say what we want our words to be.
Yes, but then we have to clarify it. Yeah, thank you.
One person in my group of 3 used the phrase authentic curiosity to talk about what is it in each of us that allows us to want to know the things that have been cast out and wants to know it in others. So I love that phrase, authentic, because we were asking, what is that in us? Authentic curiosity.
Yeah, perfect.
Can I say one more thing? I really like what Rosa is pointing out, this sense of like we're not alone, right? We are in a community. And I'm reminded of what a long time ago Thich Nhat Hanh really put forth, which he said, the community is our dharma and our sangha. And but that's true that sometimes we need something very different than the space to voice something, or so the community, or that sense of it's we are a chain, or we are together, and we don't need the same thing, and it doesn't come out in the same way, and all of that needs to be also welcome for a real
Needing different things needs to be welcome. Yes.
Yeah. And the community is needed for that. Yeah. Can't do it alone. Yeah.
As
We hear you.
okay, as I'm listening to everyone, what just came up for me was just a recognition. The more we allow, the more, well, it's hard to know which comes first, allowing, recognizing our many different inside voices, but both are there together. Like the more we allow, the more we recognize all these different voices and allow, okay, I keep going back and forth, allowing more voices in ourselves to be there. Yeah, if there isn't that spirit that we're going to be looked at with open eyes, then we tend to keep everything down. But as I'm listening, I just felt more and more opening up to more of myself. That's what we're saying. Anyway, okay, thank you.
I was thinking that the listening is the focusing attitude of receptivity, and then the listening is the sort of secret ingredient that makes it possible for a community to hear all of the parts. We were discovering in the community empowerment project that Jean's idea of pouring out, that can be very difficult if people are pouring out their distress on you or their vehemence or something. That pouring out when someone in the group, maybe many of the people are triggered, but maybe somebody can really listen. And when there's any people in the community that can really listen, the transformation of the pouring out can be a real relating. They can find the gold in it. And that's what's so important about having a community, is that there are some people that are going to not be triggered by something and will be able to listen, whereas others won't be.
That reminds me, I think from my point of view, the kind of democracy that I'm presenting, it requires listening. Listening is the most fundamental democratic act.
Yes.
And I do think that until we start teaching listening widely in our societies, we're never going to quite achieve this kind of democracy that we're talking about. So we need a new version of the Peace Corps, where we have like a listening corps that travels around throughout our different countries, teaching people for free how to listen.
Well, if anybody wants to join Greg in the listening corps, I vote for that. I'll join. It's a wonderful corps. And you,
Oops. What?
and Rosa, sorry.
No, I apologize. I just really want to build on what you said earlier, Lynn, and also what Greg said is, the question of teaching and the question of how do we learn, right? Because when you were saying earlier, Lynn, that so we have a community and somebody may be pouring out and many people might be triggered, but if there's a few people who are not triggered, who are able to listen, then that that can be turned into gold, right? That the pouring out can be transformed into a contribution. And so what I want to draw out a little bit in that context, other people are getting the experience of listening through the person who is able to listen to that, right? So it's like we are learning to listen by witnessing it, by experiencing it. It's like I because it's a real question right now in the whole deliberate democracy world. How do you teach people to listen? But I just think that I don't know so much how you do it, but I know how you don't do it. And I don't think you can do it by telling people to listen, right? Because in our culture, and this is something, this next part I've thought a lot about before, in our culture, it's like the people who are in positions of power tell the people who are not in a position of power to listen to them, right? Like they're the ones who get to speak, and the people who don't have power are told to listen. Like in school, we get told to listen for all this time. So there's a way in which, yeah, being told to listen, I think can almost have the opposite effect. And in focusing, I think we give people the experience of being listened to, right? And I think that is such a powerful way of learning to listen, by having the experience of being listened to, and then by witnessing somebody listen to somebody else.
Yes,
right? It's like, oh wow, that's possible, So yeah, thank you.
Exactly. It has to be done that way, I think. It really has to be. Can I just check? I did share the text of what I read. Did people get that in the chat? Because I did it when people were in the breakout rooms, and I'm not sure if that means not everybody gets it.
I didn't get it.
Okay, I'll do it again just in case.
Great.
In case anybody wants it, yeah.
And I'm afraid we have to stop. We're a little over time. I want to thank you so much, Greg. And Dorothy, did you have a poem for us?
Katerina's going to read from her own poem today.
Okay, so we're going to end with Katerina's poem. And Greg, thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
And if anybody has further things to say to Greg, Greg, you could put your email address in the chat, and people might have other comments that they want to write to you. Okay, Katerina, we're ready for your poem.
Yeah. I could even screen share it because it's nice and green and yellow. Would you like?
It's okay. We'll just hear it because we're almost 10 minutes over.
Yeah, so I'll just put a little bit. There's 3 little parts. The haiku, time to dance. Gentle sacred dance. Lift the pain from my eyes. And whispers of bamboo. Oh, the soft, broad leaf. An old friend touches my hand. And we wait. Wait for the whispers in each corner of my soul. Hope rustles and grows. The pain in my eyes ask for truth and quiet time. Bamboo's dance unfolds. Oh, the soft stillness where earth and sky become one. Let it be freedom. Freedom to flow with solitude and communion. Keep the dance. So that's all I'll say. I put the link in the chat if you'd like to have the other part.
Oh, thank you very much. That was so beautiful, Katerina. Thank you. And have a wonderful week, everybody. And we'll send you the schedule for all of April. And bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Have a good week.
Thank you, Greg.
you.
Thank you, Katrina.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Greg. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Greg.
Thank
Yeah.
you, Greg. For some reason, Greg, I cannot download the inner diversity document. I don't know if anybody has been able to. It says, I don't know, something is not readable or not.
I succeeded in downloading it, so it's possible.
You downloaded, okay. All right.
I can't do the impossible, and I downloaded it, so therefore it's possible.
It's possible. That's so great. So maybe, can I put my email and you can send it to me in an email?
You have my email?
No.
I'm going to put my email. Anybody who writes to me, I will send a copy.
Great.
Thank you so much, Jim. I think you do the impossible.
Okay, so.
Thank you, everybody.
Nope, it didn't show up. Didn't show up. Let me try again.
Didn't show up, no.
It's because I have too many computers here and I typed on the wrong keyboard. There we go.
Jim. Thank you, Jim.
Okay.
Thank you, Pat.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Katrina.
Thank you.